Hello and welcome to Revision Tips for SIPS Level 6, Professional Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 9, which is Supply Network Design, and it's Learning Outcome 2 to understand operational strategies and its contribution to overall business success. So procurement and supply managers are tasked with ensuring that the distribution function operates efficiently, but also managing internal functions, upstream suppliers and downstream networks. Now, traditionally, operations strategy has resulted from a top-down process formed in response to strategic goals from an organisation. Operations are often considered to be concerned only with the short-term day-to-day associated with the process and any resources the organisation needs to implement that strategy. But procurement managers need to help the organisational leaders to develop a perspective that sees operations as a strategic component, acknowledging the strategic impact organisations have. And a failure to supply the resources that they need or the poor implementation of that process can prevent strategic objectives from being achieved. Now, when considering the idea that operations strategy is the focus on the process and enabling organisations to deliver the goods and services it produces for its customers, from a procurement's perspective, that will also include delivery of products and services to the internal clients as well as the customers externally. And our responsibility in procurement is to design, develop and implement them processes that's needed to organise the resources needed for the customer. Now, there are 5 attributes to developing strategic thinking. You know, we all face challenges in a fast-moving competitive marketplace, and our businesses are continually disrupted by technological advances that we can't understand. And traditional operation strategy develops, and it's required to be more simple and be able to conduct an environment analysis. I mean, we can use tools like a SWOT analysis or Steeple. But if your operation strategy is going to be successful, it's important that it's integrated within the organisation strategy. It's also that you're achieving the same long-term goal. So an important mindset when developing your ops strategy is to approach its development from a holistic and system perspective, with 5 attributes that are needed for the procurement professional to develop strategic thinking. The system perspective. This is the first attribute, that is developing a systems perspective to deliver an ability to understand how value can be created within a system. So this is about thinking as an ability to truly understand the current reality an organisation finds itself in, while being able to understand what changes are needed to be made for an organisation structure. You've got to remember, you know, businesses don't operate in a vacuum. Instead, operation strategies need to respond to a dynamic and rich system of independent and interrelated parts. And a vital driver of that strategic thinking is the realisation that the organisation's survival requires a response to different dependencies within the wider organisational ecosystem. And our ability to navigate those relationships and alliances requires an understanding of the various connectors across departments, functions, suppliers and buyers, whilst also managing the interrelationship between separate parts of the system. So the ability to comprehend that minute detail on individual aspects that affect the larger systems while managing the interconnection of the parts is going to be a precursor of the development of a coherent operation strategy. The second is the intent focused. This means developing a focus of attention that ensures that all the energy within an organisation is directed at achieving those organisational goals. So it needs to concentrate on achieving clearly defined goals. And if outstanding performance by an organisation is achieved, or is going to be achieved, it's essential that its intended goal shapes and drives the actions that are taken by procurement and key suppliers. Now, the third one being intelligent optimism. So this intent needs to be balanced with the third attribute. This requires the procurement professional to ensure that they do not get consumed by their intent focus, so they lose sight of an alternative strategy. And that might be more appropriate to respond to the changes occurring in that environment. So the attribute of intelligent optimism tempers intent focus from being single-minded, but instead it relates to constant re-evaluation of the direction of travel to determine whether the intention is still valid. And now this is further supported by the fourth attribute, thinking in time. So the timeliness of your decision making and using your past experience to recognize patterns that are occurring to formulate your strategy is ultimately essential. So thinking in time is about being responsive to the current reality, as well as being respectful of the past, while renewing the organization's operation strategy for the future. And the final attribute is being hypothesis-driven. And what this requires procurement to do is step away from the traditional rational logic approach to business, where decision-making is based on the analysis of data. And instead, hypothesis-driven approaches to operations ask the procurement professionals to simultaneously create their approach to developing strategy and do that in a critical way. It basically means asking what if, followed by if then, and these statements and conducting research find out the answer to those what if questions. And they might lead to a revolution or a resolution to defining, not follow a particular strategy. But equally, they might result in the innovation and market disruption that creates significant competitive advantage. Now, we have to argue as well that an important strategy focuses on the operations and the development of a sustainable supply chain with an increased emphasis on environment and social sustainability, in addition to being economically efficient. Now, research into organisation to determine whether or not they have an operation strategy can yield some very interesting responses. And this includes a spectrum of responses varying from confusion over what is meant by an operation strategy to those who have determined how to provide the necessary operational resources that's needed to respond to the demands of those internal and external environments. So Slack and Lewin offered an overview of how these different operational approaches fit into operation strategy. You've got total quality management, which offers a long-term commitment to quality and seeks to identify problems at every stage of the operation process to eliminate them. And it emphasises operational and infrastructural change. Lean operations focuses on the flow of products and services to deliver at a low cost and perfect quality with no waste. And it's exactly what the customer wants, when they want it, and at the location of their choosing. Clearly, this is a traditional downstream strategic approach that considers each stage in the operation network and attempts to remove problems and increase intrinsic efficiency. And then we've got business process re-engineering. This shapes an organisation's strategy, and it's about streamlining decision-making processes to reduce costs and create efficiency in the organisation's structural resource. Process technologies is utilised to facilitate cost reduction and balance capacity along the end-to-end process. And Six Sigma you may be familiar with from earlier levels. This focuses on decision-making regarding infrastructure and process control. And it can be argued that Six Sigma delivers a process technology strategy, but most of its impact is in the development of systems, procedures, and business routines. But for many organisations, the implementation of these approaches is focused more on the adoption of operations best practice rather than the development of an operation strategy that's going to be fit for purpose. And that's regardless of the strategy that it chooses. So a strategy determines the long-term direction of the operations function, and it helps the function understand which factors should form the strategic objectives. Two indicators of whether an organisation has a function operation strategy includes how the operation function positions itself in terms of its understanding of its market requirements. And this will include articulation of customer requirements, the position of the organisation within the market, and the clarity regarding its competitors, objectives, and actions. And that can be expressed in terms of performance objectives, which include the cost, the quality, the speed, the dependability, the flexibility. So from a cost perspective, clearly efficiency is measured as the cost per transaction completed, or the price or the discount. The quality is the accuracy measured as a percentage of the products manufactured to the specification, or the accuracy of that information. The speed is the timeliness of the action, measured at the time it takes for a customer's call to be answered by a call centre, or the responsiveness. And dependability is being right first time. So it's measured as a percentage of deliveries that arrive on time, in full, or reliably. And flexibility is the ability to change, measured at a rate of innovation or customization. And the second question is, how does the organisation respond to that identified market requirements? And examples of operation strategy decisions will look at things like capacity, which is the operations function capacity level. What's its utilisation of resources and the number of locations it has, the distributions of its activities, facilities management, speed of capacity to increase or decrease, and the supply network design. And that's the interconnection and interdependence in the supply chain asset management. That includes possible areas of, risk analysis, areas of disruption, outsourcing, inventory management, and the management of its suppliers and stakeholders. Then you've got process technology. That's the choice of the information management system, the machines and the processes that you use to support the procedures required to operate and execute those tasks, as well as any activities, automation, or integrated technology solutions and productivity. And the final bit is the development of organisation design, the management of lines of reporting, the team structures, the roles, the responsibilities and accountabilities, and the physical infrastructure of an operations function. The organisation of the governance and processes, continuous improvement and management of its revenue and cost. Now, there are three core levels of organisational strategy: corporate strategy, which is the master plan, the business level strategy, and the functional or operational strategy. The corporate strategy outlines the missions, visions, and values of an organisation as a whole. It's usually high-level ambitions for an organisation, and the purpose is to determine the goal for that organisation, the industry, the markets, and the regions that the organisation will be operating in, and how the organisation will be managed in terms of values. The business level strategy is determined by each operational unit. So, for example, in a multinational enterprise, there will be a global corporate strategy supported by regional business strategies like Europe or the Middle East. And this helps coordinate products and service market niches, developing strategies, competing in distinctive markets, and developing competitive advantage by conforming to the needs of a particular market. And that's based on current economic development. And the third one is the functional operational strategy. This relates to a particular area of activity within a business, like procurement or human resources, finance, marketing, and sales. And this helps to ensure that functional expertise is developed to deliver the strategic direction of an organisation as a whole. And the capabilities and capacity exist to deliver that operational strategy. So these operational strategies need to be relevant and aligned to the overall business strategy. There needs to be vertical integration along these three core levels of organisational strategy. So effective horizontal alignment between operations and other functions like HR, sales and finance is equally important to ensure that internal function processes are supportive and integrated to deliver efficient, effective internal process networks. And there are many tensions between the goals and activities of different organisations. You've got different routes to market, different products or services operating under different trading regulations. So your strategy needs to be able to offer multiple strategies that's going to vary depending on the needs of different parts of your organisation. But your overall strategy that provides broad scope of direction, the overall business strategy, that gives more room for the operation function to develop an innovative and creative strategy to carry the organisation in the direction of its purposeful endeavour. Now, this particular strategy argues that traditional design of organisations within the hierarchical approach to strategic management leads to some, disillusionment, drudgery, infighting, power games, whatever you want to call them. And this is L6. He developed a hypothesis for the emerging organisation models, and he's designed to manage the complexity of complementary and contemporary business operations using a colour scheme. So it compares the dominant orange organisation with that of a positive green organisation. And then the hypothetical teal organisation. So orange organisations with the guiding metaphor of a machine. This organisation is concerned with achieving competitive advantage to drive profit and growth. Managerial command and control structure dictates what should be done and how organisations should be run. Examples of organisations that are orange are Coca-Cola, Nike and BMW. The green ones, as a guiding metaphor, is one of a family, and it's concerned with driving employee empowerment and motivation through a focus of organisational culture. And there's a shift from satisfying shareholders towards this kind of wider understanding of stakeholders in the business. So the focus on participative management to drive collaboration. So examples of green businesses include Ben & Jerry's and Southwest Airlines. And the teal organisation is viewed as a living organism. It's an evolutionary process to enable all employees to realise their talent potential. And in here, that the hierarchical management is replaced by self-management, and employees adopt a system perspective, seeking wholeness, interlocking structures and practices, ensuring that decisions, rights and powers are distributed based on who has the expertise, interest and willingness to lead. And fluid hierarchy replaces fixed hierarchies. So some examples of teal organisation is Sun Hydraulics, the John Lewis Partnership. And there are obviously the amber and the red ones here that also could, look at how they work. I mean, the book sort of talks about the orange, green and teal, but from an amber perspective, it's very much army, formal roles. And the red one is a bit wolf pack, it's very impulsive. Now, the market requirements are determined by two distinct elements: the task environment, which is the factors that relate to the business in which an organisation is engaged and has a direct input. And the general environment is the steeple factors. So social cultural factors that are influenced by attributes to work and attitudes. They're driven by factors like demography, age, growth, and social class. The technological factors impact the rate of change due to advancements, the types of work and methods of communication. Ecological or environmental factors are how the operations of an organisation affect and are affected by the environment. Economic factors could include the levels of employment and economic indicators, which impact the climate positively or negatively depending on whether the economy is growing or in recession. Political factors determine how partisan policies and political movements influence the attitudes and values of people within an organisation. And legal factors are often linked with political factors like regulations and statutory laws that impact the operations of an organisation. That includes kind of environmental law, international law, trade regulations, monopolies, mergers, business taxation even. The ethical factors are linked to social values that are the basis of an organisation's decision making. And the demographic factors are factors that include details about the markets and the consumers within them, such as the size of the population, education, gender, age, marital status, and language. But the microenvironment refers to factors that directly relate to a business in which the organisation is engaged, and that can have a different impact on an organisation's ability to achieve its strategic goals. Directly reflecting industry conditions, the task environment sort of affects the process of management in terms of what decisions and actions the manager is able to make in any given circumstance. So we know that we've got supplier power. It looks at the supplier power to affect its strategic agenda. If a supplier produces a product that's rare or difficult to imitate, they've got more power to drive the prices up. But if they are a fierce competition of a particular supply market, the supplier power will be relatively low. The buyer power, this is an assessment of how price sensitive a buyer is, and the power the buyer has to dictate the product or service mix offered by an organisation. Competitive rivalry looks at the number of capable rivals in a marketplace. In a crowded market, competitors will be numerous and have a number of product features that an organisation needs to compete with, and that clearly makes the market less attractive. But if you're operating in a new market segment, or one where they have very clearly differentiated offerings, the market will be slightly more attractive. The threat of substitutes is when organisations offer products and services that can be easily substituted. And that's more vulnerable to customers seeking alternatives or switching to a rival based on price increases or an organisation's failure to be responsive. And then the threat of new entry in a market that is profitable, it's likely that new entrants will be attracted. That erodes market share, existing actors in the market, and eroding profitability. But incumbent organisations will seek to develop strong and durable barriers to entry, such as the use of patents, economies of scale, and regulations. Now, the external context of the organisation is important in determining the demands of the environment that an organisation needs to be responsible for. And although some external forces may have very little impact on organisations, others will greatly affect the resource and strategic choices. So in regards to the organisation system, there are 4 distinctive forces that provide the basis for an organisation's response to the demands from the operating environment. Firstly, the task. This is the examination of the jobs and activities that need to be completed as part of the operations functions. But it also examines the characteristics of the work itself, like the working conditions and the physical and mental requirement of that actual job. Finally, task enables the assessment of the quality and quantity of the product to be delivered to an organisation, not only to its kind of internal standards, but also based on its competitors. The second is the formal system. This looks at the processes, the policies and procedures that exist within that process function. Like the systems, the machines, the processes. And this provides an opportunity to review how those functions enable an agile response to the demand. The culture examines the values and behaviours of its operations functions, and that's in relation to the people that contribute to the social system. It's about power and how that's distributed to the wider organisational system. It's all about, this is the way things get done around here. And then the people, this is about how the capabilities deployed within the function are utilised, because that system is going to be made up of both informal and formal decision making. So it looks at being able to design operational functions to ensure that skills, knowledge and experience, attributes and behaviours of people are aligned to deliver an effective response to the demand of the external environment. And then moving on to the product life cycle. One method of determining whether the operation strategy is aligned is understanding the organisation's patterns in relation to the products and services in its life cycle. Patterns of sale revenue or volumes of products or services are an indication of where in the life cycle the organisation is, and it should provide the operations function with an indication of where to allocate resources. Revenue and profit can be plotted to determine whether a product or service is in one of the following stages. The introduction stage, where it's first introduced to the market. Your strategy should be focused on developing new product awareness, developing the brand, establishing the quality level, and protecting your intellectual property. The growth stage. This is when the product or service is beginning to build a market share. Sales are increasing and resources will need to be deployed to ensure quality levels are maintained. And additional features of support services are added. At the maturity stage, the strong growth enjoyed previously begins to diminish because competitors and new entrants begin to offer similar products and services. So this will put pressure on price as competition becomes more intense. So incentives may need to be offered to maintain presence in certain distribution channels. And the decline stage is where the product or service sales begin to decline by the operation strategy. And this will determine whether to continue to maintain the product by investing in new features or rejuvenate the brand, reduce the cost, or by selectively offering the product or service as a niche offering. Or alternatively, you can discontinue the product altogether. A major feature of an operations plan or operations strategy is the existence of a clear vision and its objectives, a direction of travel that is formally documented and integrated into the decision-making processes. In practice, this requires the procurement professional to evaluate alternatives open to an organisation and maybe predicting future trends and considering ways in which operation functions can improve its short and long-term performance. So the vision itself is an aspirational statement about what an organisation wants to become. And that's a way for an organisation to communicate a future ideal state for its operations function. It's usually written in a vision statement, and that will encapsulate the operation function's belief about the principles of the ideal conditions that's going to govern the way in which the function will operate and grow. The four-stage model of operations comes from courtesy of Hayes and Wheelwright. These four categories reflect an organisation's approach to their operational design and system. And it's designed to develop and help evaluate the contribution that the operation function is making to that organisation's strategic performance in terms of competitive advantage. So stage one, this is internally neutral. This is where the operation function is focused on its internal environment and responds to external environment events reactively. Stage 2 is externally neutral. This operation function seeks to emulate best practice learned from competitors in the marketplace or industry norms. And they do that in order to prevent problems with the organisation. So here you'll see practices like lean operations, total quality management, and Six Sigma, as well as some business process re-engineering might be adopted. Stage 3 is the internally supportive. The operations function seeks to contribute to the strategic objectives through strategic alignment of operational performance, offering the scope for operations to continue to offer a competitive advantage. And here, the organisation seeks to be an industry leader with regards to its operation functions. And then stage 4 is externally supportive. This function provides the organisation with the basis for competitive advantage. It shapes the operation standards in its industry and seeks out a world-class standard where its practices are emulated by others. So it provides inputs into the formulation of an overall business strategy. But Hayes and Wheelwright argue that organisations should aspire to achieve the highest level, stage 4, for its strategic operations. And this 4-stage model has contributed to the evolution of operation functions, but perhaps now a historical critical milestone in the development of modern procurement as a strategic function. Now we're now looking at the resource-based view, which has its origins in economic theory and suggests that exceptional operational performance is delivered by the way in which an organisation builds its capabilities, as well as how it acquires, develops and deploys its resources. Now this contrasts with a market-led approach, which is focused on positioning of an organisation in a marketplace. But it does suggest that organisations can protect their competitive advantage by building their resources in a way that they're difficult to emulate. So they need to invest in research, the resources that exist in the organisation, and find a competitive advantage. And they can be tangible things like production facilities, or even your ERP intangible stuff like branding, relationships, or even expertise. Now, according to Slack and Lewis, resources become strategic from the resource-based view if they have some of the following properties. Scarcity, and that's if the organisation is able to access the resources that are restricted to other people. This can display disparity, leading to competitive advantage, and can result in the innovation, especially in development of proprietary materials and software that disrupt the market's intellectual property rights. So they have the cutting edge specialisation that it's hard for competitors to copy. Then you've got immovability. And here resources are very limited in their ability to be moved outside the organisation. It may be that expert knowledge resides in the employee or resources that are subject to limited supply arrangements. And this provides organisations with a time-based advantage, which limits the ability of new entrants to gain traction in the marketplace. And then finally, originality. An organisation will achieve a resource-based advantage when its products or services are difficult to imitate or substitute. So a competitor may be able to copy the resources, but originality may be in the value of duplicating less valuable, imperfect, and/or predictable to consumers. So one of the key assumptions here is that the resources within the organisation are heterogeneous, and regardless of the industry and sector, each will have a unique mix of resources that can be utilised in a particular way to achieve that competitive advantage. But the implications of this assumption is that merely copying best practice from a different organisation will be disadvantageous because the organisation doesn't have access to the same mix of resources to compete effectively. Now, we looked at this earlier, but just coming back to this VRIO analysis by Barney, They provide a tool to enable organisations to identify the internal resources that can provide a competitive advantage. And it covers 4 areas that enable us to capture the value of the resources. So how valuable is the resource or the capability? If it's available to the organisation and it's not valuable, then it's likely that not only will they not contribute to a competitive advantage, but actually could lead to you having a competitive disadvantage or a loss in the position of the market. So a resource is valuable if it helps you to respond appropriately to challenges and exploit opportunities from the external environment. So the value chain analysis and SWOT can also be used to help an organisation identify those valuable resources. But it's worth noting that due to the change in environmental context, what was once valuable can lose its value as conditions change. The next is, how rare is that resource or capability? If it's available to both the organisation and its competitors, then at best the resource provides an organisation competitive parity. But resource or capability that is rare, like proprietary technology or preferential access to raw materials, is really difficult for competitors to obtain. And this is going to help your organisation to exceed the efforts of its competitors. So if you have a new system or a new piece of machinery or a new procedure, or even a leading edge design, that might make it difficult for competitors to secure similar resources with which to compete. But if you lose that valuable resource, it means the cheaper alternatives can commoditize a product or service. The third, how costly is it for competitors to imitate? If it's easily imitated, it's not going to provide you with a competitive advantage in the long term. The more difficult it is for an organisation to imitate the original, the greater level of competitive advantage and the longer it will be maintained. So an example here is Dyson, who introduced the bagless vacuum cleaner. Its dual cyclone technology was patented, which made it difficult for competitors, but imitators soon made their way into the market. And the last one in the O is the business organised to capture the full value of that resources? And if you can't make use of your resources, then it will achieve temporary competitive advantage. But it will soon lose it if systems, processes, and design do not enable it to sustain that advantage. So if you take an example of Pokemon Go, launched in July 2016 to deliver a popular augmented reality mobile game. And that was one of the most profitable money apps or mobile apps of the year. But technical issues and server outages and controversy over player safety led to negative press and eventually a significant level of lapsed players who quickly lost interest after the release of a new feature. So if you're going to achieve a competitive advantage, it's essential that you examine what heterogeneous resources exist and whether the operation process and systems are organised in a way that allows you to exploit these effectively to deliver a competitive advantage. Now, once there's clarity about the vision and objectives, the procurement needs to determine how competitive priorities need to be addressed to deliver the operational strategy and contribute to overall business success. So from a quality perspective, quality performance objectives are going to vary according to the product or service that's being examined. And for many, this can relate to the quality of materials used in manufacturing. So the difference between fake leather and high quality Italian leather. Other examples might be the durability, the desirability, the serviceability, or the reliability. And high quality products are often perceived to be better than competitors' products. And also the customer is willing to pay more for those with features or functionality that are considered to go above and beyond the others. You've then got speed. Speed is often simple as the time it takes for a product to be delivered from the start of the process, but speed can also refer to customer order processes, like the number of clicks required to order a product on a website, one-click ordering for delivery time, same-day delivery. You've got dependability, which is about delivering the promises every time. In manufacturing, this has traditionally been associated with keeping delivery promises. And Slack and Lewis provide a simple calculation that dependability equals due delivery time minus actual delivery to determine whether those promises have been kept. And flexibility allows an operational function to configure the operational systems in a way that allows it to change direction according to the market and the customer needs. So it contributes to speed, but also it enables an organisation to deliver customization and different variants of the products according to the demand. So can you make the necessary changes to adapt to a market condition or a change in customer expectation without damaging speed of performance? And from a cost perspective, cost performance seeks to determine whether the product or service should be priced higher or lower. And that's against their competitors. So we look at the financial inputs, fixed costs, capital expenditure, the cost of equipment, the facilities, or the variable costs relating to the operational expenditure like labour and raw materials, which clearly change depending on sales. But either pricing strategy is suitable, the marketing position of the organisation and industry will determine the cost of the product. Now, Porter set out 4 generic strategies that fed into its operational cost strategy. We've got cost leadership, which determines and seeks to become a low-cost producer in order to attract a broad customer base. And that's attributed to low-cost pricing strategy. Its purpose is determined by accessing this rare VRIO resources, making it very difficult for another processor or producer to assess these raw materials. Now, organisations here will seek to take advantage of those economies of scale. And that's in order to achieve and sustain a cost leadership. More likely, with products or services that are easy to imitate, it relies on the operations functions being organised to deliver products or services in cost-efficient quantities. If you go into the differentiation box, this is uniqueness that allows the organisation to set a premium price for its products, enabling us to access higher margins. It provides an opportunity for managing costs without necessarily seeking to be the cheapest in the market. So from an operations perspective, cost is measured by value and what customers and clients value. And the focus is on providing products and services that are valued by the end user. And price and cost are less important as a performance objective. Moving into the cost focus, this requires the operations functions to seek a cost advantage in an identified target segment. And that could be some products, but not necessarily all. And as an example, a supermarket has a low-cost range of groceries considered as stapled foods like milk and bread, which are often considered loss leaders. So procurement and supply must negotiate with suppliers to deliver a tailored different price strategy. And the final box is the differentiation focus, which requires an organisation to deliver uniqueness in a particular target segment. You might often customise your pricing due to unique and desirable features which are focused on a particular set of needs. And they also seek to deliver specific products to customers and clients that have highly specific needs. So here, what you might see is vegan wine or things that are manufactured without traditional fining agents, such as milk and protein and egg whites and animal proteins. But it's also promoted as an excellent accompaniment to vegan dishes. Now, in developing the operation strategy, procurement is often faced with the complicated decision over managing the different choices with regards to the capacity and resources, and how best to respond to market demand with regards to timescales and output. But adding to this complicated decision-making process is the unpredictability of demand, which means that operation functions can configure itself to match the demands from the market, but only to find that the market has changed, leading to a waste of resources. So the calculation each operation function must grapple with is how to match demand with what the organisation is able to provide in terms of capacity and resources at the right time. And that requires accurate forecasting. In short, the capacity and resources versus timescales and outputs direct how an organisation will provide the right amount of goods and services at the right time. So it's crucial procurement develop an understanding of how capacity is managed. And there are three different categories. You've got design capacity, you've got effective and available capacity, and you have the actual capacity. But one issue that operation functions face is managing capacity and capability constraints. And that occurs for a number of reasons, including the equipment that is not working or incapable of delivering the expected optimum throughput. You could have process bottlenecks or problem with staff availability. So your organisation needs to examine the suitability of its resource mix. So you've got the headcount and skills. And that can be increased by providing employees with learning and development opportunities to contribute to the enhanced level of skills, knowledge and understanding within the workforce. The IT infrastructure and technology, having increased levels of automation, reducing process times and introduction of new technology can greatly increase your ability to increase speed of your operation. The input variables is a review of the materials used. And that can increase the ability or an availability of key suppliers for products and services, which will improve the dependability of input variables in the process. The product and service mix depends on the breadth of the products that are offered by your organisation. And the ops function can review these product and service mixes to improve overall system capacity. So looking at the mix of products in terms of profit margins or the life cycles, resource allocation, and the quantities produced or delivered can really help to increase that capacity. The storage and distribution is clearly about getting products and services to customers, and that can have an impact on the timing and geographical ability, as well as the availability of that product. So if you can ensure that the finished goods are distributed quickly, that's going to help to mitigate the requirement for expensive and expansive storage facilities. And then availability. This is about globalization increasing the expectation of this kind of 24/7 service levels. So I think employees are seeking more flexible working hours than the traditional 9 till 5. And technology has clearly given us the opportunity to create virtual teams operating globally in different time zones. So we can increase our capacity beyond the standard 8-hour day, introducing shift patterns and out-of-hours services. Now, as customer demands have shifted, the demand an organisation has on its operations systems has been to develop processes and procedures that enable greater levels of flexibility to increase customisation, as well as the number of products or services made to specification, focusing on eliminating waste. So continuous improvement focuses on that sustained effort to improve the operational processes, products and services over the long term. And with operations, the aim of continuous improvement looks at ways to find how those operational systems can become more efficient or even deliver higher levels of quality whilst reducing costs. And I suppose generally speaking, continuous improvement covers that gradual identification and implementation of small-scale improvements over time, which together result in a significant enhancement. But it's worth noting that continuous improvement per se doesn't have a particular theoretical basis, but it's an overarching term that covers different methodologies and tools that deliver continuous improvement throughout the organisation. Now, effectiveness and efficiency are words that are used regularly when discussing operations, but they're often used synonymously or incorrectly. In simple terms, effectiveness examines what is done in the organisation, and efficiency is about how work is completed. It's possible for an organisation to be effective doing the right things, but doing them inefficiently. Another circumstance may be that the organisation is efficient in that they're doing the right things, but they're ineffective because they're doing the wrong things. So the ideal is to do the right things the right way. So operational flow effectiveness design elements which optimize organizational features like people, information, equipment, material flows, and improvement based on organizational learning. So we have at first the social system, which is a kind of culture that an organization has. And that's all about developing teamwork and interdependency between those individuals. You create a high-performing team who are pivotal to the development of an operations environment. And they have all the required capabilities to deliver against the spectrum of cost, quality, speed, dependability, and flexibility, as well as performance measures. The technical system has robust controls that contribute to the quality of the equipment, the processes, and material flows. And this enables double loop learning, providing transparency and responsiveness needed to quickly identify issues and proactively manage and maintain operation flows. The supply chain relationship is citing the criticality of the performance of supply chain flows. This design element requires collaboration between the buyers and the suppliers. And learning and improvement systems. Continuous improvement, efficiency, and effectiveness are created by having higher levels of capabilities within the organisation. And that's so that you can adapt and learn in a highly competitive environment. Being effective is not a one-time event, but the ability to integrate technical competence and mastery with situational awareness, enabling the development of countermeasures to actions taken by organisations' competitors. But there is a trade-off between performance and objectives. So trade-offs are needed in order to position operational performance objectives or to deliver an increase in both efficiency and effectiveness within that system. It may be needed or may be between cost, dependability, quality, speed, and flexibility. It's often discussed in terms of two competing variables, i.e. the cost and the quantity, or the dependability and the speed. But usually they've got multiple factors involved. Performance objectives within each operations decision should be continually evaluated to determine which will best lead to the achievement of the operation strategy and its performance objectives. So for example, in an organisation with a cost leadership strategy, cost will be a consideration when sourcing from your suppliers. But quality and dependability will also be important because if the cheap raw material is not delivered on time, that could end up costing you much more in the long term. So the only trade-off is the product or service variety. And you can look at this from a sort of Boston Consulting Group matrix. I mean, you're seeing that on the screen now. It determines which products or services are most beneficial to assessing relative market share and market growth. And there are products and services under 4 categories. You've got the stars that have high relative market share and high growth. The stars have the opportunity to become market leaders, but they do need investment to retain their position. The problem child They can be difficult to manage since they have the opportunity to become stars in the growth market but are struggling to gain market share. The cash cows have high relative share but low growth. These services dominate the market position and deliver efficiency through large economies of scale, as well as effectiveness through the generation of significant revenue with little cost to maintain. And the dogs are the products or services that have low market share and low growth. They're ineffective to maintain due to the resources needed to manage their service. So this Boston matrix can be used to help an organisation make decisions about what mix of products or services it should invest in and which it should divest. And there will be trade-offs between higher growth products and services and those market shares, with a balance needed regarding investment levels and resource availability. These trade-offs in the Boston matrix ask very similar questions to those that are demanded on the operations management, like what mix of performance objectives would be helping an organisation to achieve market share gains, generate a cash surplus, or even position the organisation for competitive advantage and long-term sustainable performance. So for the procurement professional, the difficulty of calculating the trade-offs to make between performance arises from the fact that there is no absolutes in terms of perfect performance mix. For every problem, there are multiple solutions. So procurement need to find a way to fully understand the trade-offs they're considering and determine whether there is a better alternative to a solution under consideration. Now, the efficient frontier is a tool that provides the procurement professional with the means by which it can determine the best alternative. It's a financial tool that calculates the investment curve of optimal returns and risks of trade-off solutions. Originally, as we said, it was a financial tool. It represented optimal returns for given levels of risk. But it also looks at the trade-off in the performance of portfolio of standard deviation. And that's a combination of trade-offs. Standard deviation is a measurement used to quantify the spread of variation from the average. Now, the frontier curve is a result of diminishing marginal returns on risk. So the point closest to the line on the graph, which is the one on the left-hand side, represents the combination of solutions that maximize returns, and those further away from that line on the graph represent inferior combinations of trade-offs between the performance objectives. So the purpose of this is to look at those trade-offs that has a better return on investment with the same risk, or a trade-off that produces the same return on investment for a lower risk. Now, the one on the right-hand side is looking at an efficient frontier that can be used to determine different approaches of trade-offs that's going to improve effectiveness in order to deliver a new efficient frontier. But from an organisational perspective, there are three different efficient frontiers. One model, the return on investment and the risk of the current operational system. Another represents what is achievable should the organisation engage in an improvement in the supply network through continuous improvement efforts. And the third examines that longer term vision. So modelling more than one curve can help you to understand which trade-off portfolio combination will help to move the operational system from the current state to the future state. Improvement gap analysis is used to manage those trade-offs. It considers changes that need to be made to the operational function in the short, the medium, and the long term. It prioritises those strategies by examining how current operational performance is contributing to levels of dissatisfaction and to a lower performance of operational strategy. So a two-dimensional matrix provides positive operation strategies with priorities for improvement and produces four quadrants. The first one is critical for improvement, delivering a higher level of customer dissatisfaction with a significant improvement gap of operational strategies. So improvements in this area are critical to the future survival of a business, and they really shouldn't be ignored. The second quadrant keeps up the performance. These strategies deliver good performance but have the capacity to create high levels of customer dissatisfaction. Therefore, monitoring and controlling activities are recommended to ensure that performance remains consistent. The third quadrant is to evaluate if necessary. So these strategies provide an opportunity for a business to manage reduced performance if required. They don't endanger the operation by contributing to dissatisfaction, and they present low improvement gaps. And the fourth quadrant is about being attractive. These strategies avoid causing dissatisfaction if missing, but can continue to improve customer satisfaction if they're improved. So the improvement gap analysis enables procurement to determine which areas of the operation function need to be improved to avoid competitive advantage penalty. It also enables them to make recommendations of the strategy improvements by identifying areas that have the greatest potential to deliver improved performance levels and increased customer satisfaction. And that is the end of Learning Outcome 2. Thank you for watching.